We're recorded. Everything is good. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Lorandom podcast. We are right in the middle of 2025. I'm your host, Peter Baumann, the editor-in-chief at Lorandom, and we have a very special episode today. We are joined by the team, 3/4 of the team, and so that is the funny guys, the co-founder and CEO of Lorandom, and also Konrad Haus, our collection lead. This is a conversation that is continuing now, a bit of a tradition where at the end of each quarter of the year, we reflect, we look back, and we look at the artwork and the artists and the exhibitions and some of just the big picture trends that we noticed over the last few months. And it's our way to kind of take stock when everything seems to be moving so fast around us. It's a nice little exercise that we enjoy internally. So yeah, we're excited to share it with you. Let's go ahead and get started. I think we'll start with some of the big picture topics of 2025, the second quarter / first half so far. Yeah, what do you guys think that, especially April onward this year, were some of the big picture trends or takeaways that you have all noticed?
I think one of the more over-encompassing or like broader themes, or I guess just conversation topics that we've been seeing a lot recently is kind of these major digital art spaces or kind of institutions arising, like newer ones, obviously with like the Node Foundation announcement that happened over the quarter being quite huge, and even the more recent announcement of Canyon opening up in New York. And both of these kind of institutions or organizations creating spaces both on different coasts of the states, obviously. But really interesting to see kind of these huge conglomerates coming together and being formed around digital art. Really exciting to see like where the future holds. And this almost kind of ties into some of like the other broader topics that we'll be talking about a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I also agree with that. There has been, I believe, like a continued trend of like also like the world's getting closer, digital art and traditional arts, let's say. But sometimes it's still quite sobering to go to, like, for example, the main fair at Art Basel. And there's not really much digital art presence, even in 2025. I agree with you, Conrad, like this quarter specifically, there has been like a few digital art focused organizations that opened, which does stem me quite hopeful for the future, because I do think we have to build like new organizations from the ground up. Because if we're just going to wait for like the old ones to convert and to like fully embrace digital arts, that could be like a decades-long journey. I do think that the biggest announcements, at least from my perspective, is probably the Node Foundation. I do think that's quite important for digital arts to have Mickey Malka, who has been collecting traditional art for a very long time, who like has been like an early evangelist of Bitcoin on the West Coast, to see him like align his incentives the way he did, like with digital arts, and to like position Nodes as like the name says it itself, like Nodes of a new institution, not just one space, but like an organization that will hopefully have presence all across the globe. I think it's quite exciting to think about.
Yeah, I agree that this is probably the main takeaway from this quarter. It seems like, we were just in Basel, Jan, and at least for me, this was one of the things that I found myself talking to other people about the most, just sort of the status and the nature of these new institutions. And from Canyon, which is going to be this giant multi-use, multi-purpose, but digital art focused space right on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, all the way to Node and their facility that's going to be in Northern California and Silicon Valley, the West Coast of the US. There's a similar institution being built in Madrid by Colección Solo. Beeple has his studios. I mean, obviously this is not, it's not opening this quarter, but it's really starting to ramp up at least some of its programming. These are major institutions that are worth getting excited about and that are really sorely needed and that are going to require a lot of programming and a lot of curators and a lot of art and artists and content around them for years to come. So I think it's a really healthy, positive sign for the ecosystem. And it's something that we kind of talk about a lot when we have these talks, a bit of a divergence between positive macro trends and less positive micro trends, market-based trends. And I think that's continuing. I think it might even be intensifying in the sense that as bleak as the market gets, I think that's just as positive as the institutional news. We've also seen that it isn't just these big institutions. There have been smaller, but arguably not necessarily that much less significant galleries opening in places like New York with Heft and Super Rare's gallery there. They're just basically joining Bitforms down there on the Lower East Side, and also Mimi's new gallery is there as well. It's an exciting time for this space, especially if you are maybe down about the markets or feeling less positive or optimistic. I think that like this, some of the macro trends and signs are as positive as they've seemingly ever been.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Peter. I think a lot of people get maybe lost or like too focused or too pipelined on kind of, those micro trends, like what's happening in the now, what's happening in the small market, or maybe ignoring some like the bigger macro movements that are happening when it comes to kind of establishments being really built and actually like putting together useful and kind of canonizing art culture a bit for digital art and generative art in the bigger picture. And I think it's important that we look at the more like positive side of things and like these almost like really healthy seeds that are being sown into like the fabric that like will hopefully lead to like decades to come of like really important art to be created and contextualized and loved by like a broader community. And yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of New York specifically a lot, but it's always fascinating to see like how like different portions of the world kind of handle digital art and how digital art has evolved, whether that's, LA and New York, and you also have like the European side of things with Berlin and London and even Lisbon with the kind of the pocketed cultures that are popping up there. And then you have East Asia with Japan and Taiwan and how all these kind of different cultures of digital art evolve and seeing like which ones fan the flame to some degree. And like, I think New York seems to be like the one that's fanning the flame the most with like how much activity has been popping up there. And all those names that you mentioned, Peter, with Heft Gallery, you have the Whitney out there just doing a lot of digital art focused things. You have Bitforms, you have Rhizome. It's just a really healthy digital art ecosystem out there that I think the more people that you have putting time and effort into this movement, I think it creates a really nice environment to foster some really incredible things. And so I think all the energy that's being put into New York at the moment is going to create something really nice in the future.
Yeah, it's remarkable like how many like announcements there have been, like specifically out of New York. But I think it's also important to realize that like these announcements, like they're like qualitatively like so different than the announcements we had in 2021, 22. For new organizations to get built now, for them to get funding now, like everything is so much more difficult than it was in 21, 22, like when the market was like so hot. And a lot of the initiatives that were announced back then, like they don't exist anymore. Like people already came back on their steps. If you're building a new organization in 2025, like the chances are you'll be around for much longer than if you announce it in 21 or 22. I think these organizations, what's also interesting is that they're not like pretending to have invented fire. They are looking back at what already happened. Like, for example, Canyon is working with Rhizome. Mickey Malka with Node Foundation is working with the Bright Moments people. So they're all surrounding themselves with expertise. They're building on the foundations that are already in place, which I think also has a positive impact on their chances of succeeding.
Yeah, I agree that one of the things that I've noticed from this quarter is that New York seems to be emerging as a clear-cut hub in this space. Maybe it always has been, but with some of those newer galleries that have been opening, and then the excitement there with what Michelle Kuo's doing as the chief curator at MoMA, and what Christiane Paul's doing at the Whitney, and then what Michael Connor's doing at Rhizome, and all those gallery spaces that our guide highlighted a lot of them. And yeah, I think it was really putting that guide, Lorandum's New York City Digital Art Guide, together. To me, it made me realize that if we did this for another city, it wouldn't be as dense and there wouldn't be as much to cover. There wouldn't be as many digital native galleries or or artists based there. I do think that it seems to be taking a lead in digital culture right now. I mean, not insurmountable, but it does seem to be that at the moment it is worth highlighting. And one other thing that's interesting about New York is there's kind of this other young group of artists that is emerging, and quite a few of them, or all of them, are either from there or are based there. I think most of them are in the first half of their 20s, but people like Hugh Messi, Karen Nakamura, Maya Man, Luke Shannon, these young artists that, I think are doing some of the most interesting stuff in the space, and they all happen to be, or maybe it isn't such a coincidence, but they're all based in New York.
We can maybe jump into like some of the specific events that we had kind of experienced over this quarter, and maybe I think one that we can maybe start with is the William Mapon exhibition at Verse Gallery, which was Extension, and I think our wonderful editorial editor-in-chief Peter Baumann was actually a part of a conversation that they had in person there with Julia Greenway and Layla from Verse, which was quite nice. I just wanted to ask if you had any comments specifically on that exhibition or that event, Peter, and how that went in London.
It was really nice to go over to London for the show. Get the chance to speak with William. We'd done a piece with him for Sketchbook A right around the early editorial days. So that was in 2023. Also something recently had our 2-year anniversary for the site being live and for our editorials. And so that's a nice little benchmark. But it was nice to go down to London and speak to William 18 months later about this project. So really sort of get an update on an artist over the course of years, but still working on some similar ideas. So I thought that was really a really valuable opportunity, and also just kind of get a chance to meet up with the Verse team. I think they're doing a really great job. And another sort of small takeaway from this first half of the year is that they seem to be doing quite interesting, like distinguishing work. The curation that you guys did with Rhizome, was that in April or was that in May technically?
That was in April, I believe, when people started seeing like the actual physical takeaways from that. And that was a fun little collaboration we got to do with Michael Connor from Rhizome. And this was the kind of net art event that they're putting on in New York. And they had a larger screen that they were looking to kind of showcase some P5JS works on that kind of showed kind of the technical, innovative community side of P5JS. And so we got to kind of suggest a handful of works that we thought would be kind of cool to fit in that screen. And I think it went quite well. I think we were suggesting pieces. I think one of them kind of, we just mentioned Maya Man, but Can I Go a Yugo, which is her Feral File software social codes piece, a wonderful generative art piece. And it was really cool to see kind of excerpts on Twitter of people kind of running and playing with the system, and overall just seeing kind of the love that Rhizome received in New York just for kind of how important of figures they are. It's cool to see them get some recognition for it, and also just to maybe touch on, I think you talked about the Mapon thing in London, but one thing I forgot to mention, Peter, is it's kind of cool to see like you so involved with kind of Mapon to some degree, with you keeping up with his career throughout the years. Was you mentioned like the early 2023 article that you had with Mapon initially, and then even before that, before Lorandom, you had talked with Mapon at Right Click Save and talked about dragons and stuff. And so that was always an article that I appreciated from you, Peter, and seeing the way you talk about Mapon's art. So it's kind of cool to see kind of Mapon evolve as you evolve with him, Peter, and kind of how you two kind of riff off each other in these conversations. It's a very neat evolution to watch.
Yeah, he's probably sick of me at this point, but it's been really fun to. He was one of the first people that interested me to write about sort of a deep dive into their collection. And then, now definitely several years later, he still is. And it's been really rewarding to follow somebody that closely. It's been, hopefully I've done his work justice in some ways. But Jan, do you want to add anything about the Rhizome curation?
When I reflect on the Rhizome curation, I think of Uneasy Dream by Manolo, which is like one of the pieces that we curated for that showcase. And looking back on the quarter for me, maybe I shared Uneasy Dream on Twitter, like we put it in the Rhizome exhibition. Art News at some point asked what my favorite digital art piece is. I also put Uneasy Dream there. So maybe looking ahead to the next quarters, I should go a bit lighter on the Manolo fanboying. But that's also a highlight for the quarter for me. I think it's this quarter that Manolo started to engage more again, like with generative art as a whole, like also with the on-chain generative art community. He has been sharing a lot of work. He has started following some people. Yeah, I've heard some rumors, like people did start to chat a bit about like what that means, like Manolo following people from the on-chain community. This quarter, looking back, maybe it's going to be a turning point in Manolo's trajectory.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's always nice to see him interacting a bit more, or just even just sharing a bit more of his work has been a big blessing. And I think it's something that I think we even hinted at it in the Q1 review that we had as a podcast, but I think that's right when he kind of made his emergence from his generative cave again to start sharing work. So it was right at the end of Q1. So we were really excited to see if he was going to keep sharing it and stick around, and he has. So every day I have notifications for his tweets. So every time you see kind of a tweet notification from Manaloy, and it's just one of his nice simple shares. It's always great to see. So I hope that he sticks around, and yeah, seeing him kind of follow and kind of become more mutual with some of the actual on-chain crowd gives me hope that maybe he wants to stick around a bit more and create some new things.
Also, later in May was the Silk Bali event. That was their second iteration, a bit similar to Bright Moments, where they seem to be going to different destinations around the world. Unlike Bright Moments, there aren't usually a large number of releases. The focus is a bit more on the talks and the engagement between the quite intimate engagement with between the people that attended and the artists. To be honest, I think it was quite successful just in terms of me getting to know some of the artists there. I thought it was really successful. Like, I came away viewing quite a few different practices quite differently. I mean, I even told you guys about them already, but one of them was A.A. Murakami. They were artists that I had heard of before, and then I knew some about especially from Bright Moments in Tokyo, but they have a really rich contemporary practice I wasn't fully aware of until their presentation in Bali. Siobhan Wong, Joe Pease, Nice Aunties, David Sheldrick. I mean, a lot of these artists that make interesting work, and you kind of think, I wonder how they do that. Yeah, they actually, at this kind of event, had space, or maybe had the intimacy level right to share those things, and it was really interesting. And then I got to talk about 10 years of deep learning art. I've written about some of this stuff and tweeted about some of this stuff, but for the most part, a lot of this deep learning art started, a lot of what we consider modern AI art started in 2015, just about 10 years ago, or exactly 10 years ago. So I talked a little bit about that history. Yeah, really enjoyed that opportunity and the experience. And then right after that was NFC Lisbon. That was another really fun event. So I didn't have to travel for that one, technically, because it takes place where I live, or near where I live. That was a bit more of a mainstream event. Bali and Silk were a bit more low-key. NFC is bigger, and yeah, there are more people around for it. Yeah, there's kind of different parts of NFC, almost more than like any other event. Like, the side events are quite important, and like the dinners, things like the Arab Bank Switzerland, that they had an artist villa that I spoke at one of the days. Well, it was a AI tea time with Lorandom. So Lorandom organized this with Barbara from Arab Bank, and that was a really fun afternoon in Lisbon. We had a chat with Felican McCormick from Entangled Others and Emily Shea. So really interesting. I mean, we all love Felican and Entangled Others. It's a bit rare to just hear from Felican. So like, I really relish that opportunity to get to talk to him. And then, yeah, Emily has started using AI more and more into her workflow, has some recent work that utilized AI. So I wanted to talk to her about that. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. That event is just really well done and really well executed and really well organized. And then the main event is a little, slightly more freewheeling. It feels, my sense, just, being involved with it the last couple of years, like giving talks there. And then, just when I'm walking around as well. But it's a really good event, and it's always fun to be a part of it. I spoke on the meme stage this year, which was kind of fun. I think there was kind of almost a small meme made about kind of how ridiculous it is, but I do think it's a nice event on the calendar, and gets people in town. And right after Lisbon basically was Art Basel, and a really fun week that Jan and I had in Basel. So Jan, do you want to tell us about what were some of your takeaways from your time in Basel? So we were there from Monday to Saturday last week, so it was a full week. We saw a lot of people, went to a lot of dinners and a lot of shows, saw a lot of art. I mean, a very full week. What did you think?
Yeah, it was definitely a full week, very energizing and tiring at the same time, I would say. As you know, Peter, like I spent a lot of time like talking to collectors, artists, curators about a specific project that we have been incubating at Lorandom. As of today, it's not publicly announced yet, so I can't really say much about it, but we will publicly announce it like in the next few months for sure. And the private beta phase is open since yesterday. So if anyone is listening and would love to give it a try, this mysterious project, they can always send me a DM and I'll happily give them access. But that was for me like a really important part of the week, just getting like a lot of product feedback that you can't really get as well online. So it was very productive in that regard. Of course, like besides that, like there was like really incredible events. I think the digital art mile was like, I was actually really impressed by like how they like stepped it up like compared to last year, because like these guys, like they launched the digital art mile like in a bear market. They organized like the second edition in an enduring bear market, but yet they found like the energy, they found the resources to really organize like a great event where there was also a lot more, I would say, like participation from the traditional art world compared to last year. Like for example, on the day that we were hosting the conference, there was also Hidro Sterle, who was on one of the panels. Art Review was co-hosting it with us. There was a certain gentleman called Mark Spiegler, who was in the crowds, like asking questions. So these were all signs that were not there like last year of traditional art, like really taking notice. And then there was also like some private dinners going on where I've heard that there was also the executives of Art Basel, like meeting with digital art collectors and really showing interest in like getting advice on how to transform the fair moving ahead. And I've heard some rumors that they want to like start embracing the digital first, like at their satellite events. So in the next edition of Art Basel Miami, the next edition of Art Basel Paris, I believe also that this quarter they announced a new Art Basel that will take place in Qatar every single year. And Qatar has also been, I would say, quite at the forefront of digital innovation. So that will probably also be like one of these satellite events where the digital will be a bit more prominent than it is at the main fair. Hopefully that trickles down to the main fair over time. But what about you, Peter? How was the week?
Yeah, I think it was really productive. Yeah, I agreed a lot with what you said about, it does feel like these worlds are becoming more and more integrated, even relative to last year. I think going to Basel, the sort of center of the traditional art world universe in a lot of ways, really gives you also some perspective on our own space and kind of where it stands in relation to this other world that we're kind of a part of, but sort of, but not really. And this year it does seem like those connections are just becoming tighter and deeper. And if it was Nina's exhibition Bankable at Basel Social Club, which was probably the talk of Basel, was Basel Social Club, and to have an exhibition there curated the right way with a lot of prominent artists in the space, I think was really important. The rumors, I heard also these rumors, although I mean, I don't think in a lot of ways that they are rumors. That Art Basel is planning on taking the digital side more seriously. And it's exciting seeing in real time these worlds coming and together and being connected. And one more takeaway, just from a bit of a macro perspective, and also just from going straight from Lisbon to Basel was, I think, the really important role that Arab Bank Switzerland is playing. And I mean, they're not like, in no way am I like trying to shill them or whatever. Like, they're not our sponsor or anything like that. But I just think that they're playing an important role, bringing people together in this space, connecting this space with more people from the traditional side. And they did that in Lisbon, and they did that in Basel, and they do it at a high level. And I think it benefits the whole space. So I think that they stood out to me, and just in terms of people who I think are playing maybe an important role, but that is maybe unheralded.
I was just gonna reiterate that that fact that you brought up about Arab Bank, Peter, and yeah, I know some people could probably be a bit hesitant when an institution enters into like the art space, and pretty hesitant on like what their intentions may be. But overall, I think they've done a really good job, and I think what they've provided to the space has been really crucial at times. And yeah, just recently at NSU with the presentation of Andreas Rau's inventory numbers work was fantastic. The screen that they had for that was perfect for the piece. You can tell like a lot of thought went into it. So it's always great to see. And yeah, I think we can be hesitant when big money people like this come into our space, but we should also be pretty supportive of when they do a good job. And yeah, we should herald them for the work that they've been doing recently.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing things like awards, which Anna Ridler and Sofia Crespo won their Artist of the Year. Cesar Macan won their Emerging Artist Award. Residency. So yeah, they're doing things that are drawing attention to these artists, and I think a lot of the interesting artists, and yeah, I think they're doing good and in a sincere way. And that kind of is a good transition, Conrad, what you mentioned about Andreas, to maybe just some of our favorites of the quarter. So we kind of talked about a lot of the big picture things and events and trends and how we were involved in this quarter. But yeah, what about just the art that we liked this quarter?
Yeah, maybe we can kick it off with kind of our exhibitions of the quarter, what we were kind of looking at, what really stuck with us throughout the quarter. And I think this one will be maybe a bit more fun, since maybe we'll focus on a couple of non-digital things at first. But I think one of my exhibitions of the year is kind of, I guess, a funnier one, but it's Taewon On's Sync exhibition at Project Native Informant in London. Taewon On is a really incredible artist who kind of creates these cat compositions that are kind of deforming the image of a cat that are quite renowned, especially online, for kind of the work he's done. But he has this kind of like feline muse. I believe the cat's name is Hyro, and he always kind of paints or creates Hyro to like exist in like these very like physically complex realities, where like the portions of this cat's bodies are like really exaggerated. And I love a lot of like these kind of low poly aesthetics that he creates, and like the 3D forms that he has. And he's always been an artist that I really loved and kind of like laughed at, and his work brings me a lot of joy. So it was really awesome to see him have like this new show in London this past quarter, and something definitely like non-digital, non-NFT, non-generative. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I think any other projects that we talk about that are really NFT or generative, people maybe already have seen and already know about. So maybe this is something that somebody hasn't seen and can lead them down to something a bit new.
And maybe I can also hop in with some with one of my favorites exhibitions of this quarter. Well, I'm not sure if technically it counts as an exhibition, but every year at Art Basel there is the Unlimited section, which is basically like one extremely large space for large installation artworks. And this year there was like a really interesting piece, which was basically like a procession of like more than 80 sculptures, machines, anthropomorphic objects by Atelier van Lieshout. The piece was called the Voyage, a March to Utopia. And that piece like really left like a deep impression on me. It was really, well, like every single object was quite interesting. Like it was very like absurd, and like it came from like a wild fantasy. And my interpretation of the piece was that these artists like took their moments like at the main art fair of the year to hold up a mirror like to the visitors, like reflecting on like humans' desire to always want more, to want to like bend reality to our will, how absurd that sometimes can be. And of course, it's like a great crowd to like show this mirror to. And I thought it was like a super, yeah, like a very unique piece of art. Like I've never really seen anything like it in my life. So yeah, that was my favorite piece slash exhibition of the quarter.
Yeah, maybe this can kind of be artwork slash exhibitions. If we're talking about exhibitions, like one exhibition that I want to highlight from this past quarter was Luba Elliott's. She was the curator of the AI Art Gallery at the CVPR conference. So CVPR, that's Computer Vision and Pattern Recognition Conference. So it's more of a researcher conference, but Luba has, for the last couple of years, curated this massive group show that is really what it turns out to be, is highlighting a lot of overlooked AI artists, and also just the AI art that is probably the most cutting edge and the most interesting. She looks at over 100 artists and projects. And so yeah, some of my favorite artwork of the year, which we'll talk about more in a minute, comes directly from that show. Luba, we are really fortunate that Luba wrote about that show for us earlier this month, Reprogramming Sensory Habits. Yeah, I would say that's probably my favorite exhibition of the year. One other one that I think all liked was Machine Love, the video game and AI show at the Mori Art Museum. There was also an interesting The World Through AI show in Paris at the Jardin de Paume, and then Electric Op went from Buffalo to Nantes. So yeah, and a few other interesting shows this quarter. Anything that you guys wanted to mention about them?
No, yeah, just I think maybe since I highlighted like a non-digital one, the more digital one that stands out to me is the Machine Love show at the Mori Art Museum, and kind of their exploration of a lot of different generative systems, whether that's AI, VR, and different forms of it. But I think that's a really great show. Obviously, having people there and people like Kate Crawford and Liu Yang and others, it's a really good showcasing, and just to have Mori Art put it together too is quite nice to see. So that one is definitely, I think, the standout digital exhibition that we saw during this quarter.
Yeah, I think it was a really good show. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see it in person, but did hear good things. So maybe we can move to the art that we like this year. So this just could be projects or releases, or even kind of, well, a couple of mine were more exhibitions. So yeah, this is just what was some of our favorite art that we saw this year. Yeah, Jan, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So the piece I wanted to emphasize, it's called Symphony for N Metronomes by Andreas Rau, which is going to be released on Verse. I believe like the piece itself, like it fits well in this like lineage of participatory generative art. As you all know, like since Snowflake like started with art blocks, like community participation or like collector participation in generative art has always been important. Like a collector had to cast a transaction. This transaction hash had to be used for the generative art piece to exist. And then there was like collections like along the way, such as QQL, like brought this collector participation to like a different level, where the collector is not just like passively participating, but they're also like picking certain parameters that influence what the final token looks like. And I think this piece by Andreas, like it really fits well like in this trend towards like more and more community or collector participation. And in this artwork, like if you mint a token, like that token like represents like one metronome, but this metronome, it doesn't just exist in solitary, like it exists like in a collaborative sculpture, where like every single token is like one metronome, and together they perform as an orchestra, which also reminds me, by the way, of like the Plotter orchestras of Marcel Schwittlich, where there's also like all these machines that are on themselves like quite predictable, like together they create an interesting performance. So yeah, I think this piece, like it's also like wonderfully executed. Like if you spend some time with the artwork, like Andreas has really thought about like every single detail. If you double click, you can switch from the performance view to a view on your individual metronome that is a part of this performance. And you can interact with the piece in many other different ways. For me, this is like one of the best pieces I've seen lately.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jan there a lot on that piece that is releasing. Yeah, that project is obviously being presented by Verse and Fake Whale, who I think has been another pretty, I think, standout figure or organization this quarter, especially with another one of our favorite releases coming through them with Jan Robert Lichte and Walled Garden, which is, I think, going to be the standout release that I have for this quarter, which is, I think, harkening on a lot of the things that Jan mentioned with this, like collector participation, creating more of like an on-chain performance with your artwork. These kind of like newer ways artists are exploring these contract environments and 3D environments and digital spaces that we kind of accompany. And Walled Garden was a perfect example of this. And the whole idea of like experiencing this one similar art object, which is the garden, but with kind of a group of collectors that you're all familiar with, and each person has kind of a different view or a different take on the piece, is really interesting, and also added a lot of kind of interesting collecting dynamics for Jan and I. I think one of the things that we thought would be quite fun is to kind of collect two pieces that were essentially kind of looking at each other from the garden, so like they're kind of witnessing each other's viewing performances, and when you look at each piece displayed, like you can kind of click on each of the viewport windows of the walled garden and see kind of which collectors you're sharing spaces with, and it's a very fun kind of community experiment of social interactions, and also just kind of seeing some of the elements that Jan Robert Lichte provided within his garden, specifically like the scroll bar that we see sitting within the garden, and kind of how different viewports within the garden kind of can see these different components better than others. And it's a really incredible project. And I think one thing we've always loved about Jan Robert Lichte is how he's kind of talked about his work being sculptural. It's a very like 3D sculptural material where he uses kind of these internet and web elements to kind of craft his works together. And this really does feel like a true sculptural piece by Jan this time. And it's a really fun project to collect. And I think it's gotten a lot of kind of collective praise, which was great to see. And shout out to Fake Whale and what they've been doing this past quarter and continue to do, because they've been putting out really great work lately. So I hope it continues.
Yeah, I think those are really good choices. And yeah, I want to echo what both of you have said about this emphasis on interaction. And that's also what's been resonating with me, I think, this quarter, especially, I think, in more contemporary spaces in gallery and museum settings where you see work more on an installation level. I'm interested in that kind of thing that has moved beyond just like a series of maybe screens on a wall, but that is more interactive and participatory and embodied, and also just multimedia and experiential. So one of the examples is Jordan Wolfson's Little Room, which was at the Byler Foundation in Basel. So this piece is just, yeah, I mean, it's really bizarre. It's even hard to explain, but you enter this like sphere of cameras that takes a picture of your whole body from a 360 degrees. And then with a partner, you're placed in this virtual world where you see each other through the other person's eyes. So you are basically an embodied form of your partner in this virtual world, and you interact with each other. And that kind of piece, it's really bizarre. It gets you to think about all these different things. I won't give too much away, but there's kind of surprises when you're in this world, and it really showcases what is possible with art. And even if it's not the 100%, perfect piece, but it's something that jars you and is memorable and kind of shows you how powerful art can be, especially when you're experiencing it. Other interesting work along similar lines is something like Diffuse Control by Beeple, this AI kinetic sculpture. I think it's similar in the sense that it's interactive and it's participatory, but it's also using emerging technologies, and it's using them in novel ways. And especially the more I see of it, it's opening this week at the Shed in New York. It's something that I would really like to see in person. I think it's really interesting work and shows all the different things that AI makes possible. From something that's really physical and experiential to something like another one of my favorite AI projects of the quarter is DX Terminal by DX Research Group. It's this AI simulation that is entirely virtual, entirely takes place on a screen, and is almost the opposite in many ways, or it shows the other end of the spectrum that a lot of this other more embodied experiential AI work does. A few other things that I wanted to highlight. Rachel Rosen show, The Totalists, that opened in London. Again, she's doing really interesting work with AI that people, when they see it, wouldn't necessarily even know that the artist was using AI in their workflow. They're training AI on their childhood drawings and then kind of reinterpreting them and repainting them. So that Rachel Rosen show is really interesting. And then a couple of works from Luba's show at CVPR that she highlighted in the piece with us, Tom White's Atlas of Perception, otherwise kind of known as the flower sculpture, if you've seen or read the piece. The other work is by Karen Nakamura, and it's Surface Tension. All of these works are, well, Karen's and Tom's and Rachel Rosen's and DX Terminal. Everything except for Jordan's work is AI work. And it really demonstrates all the different ways that artists can use AI in their workflow and all the different materialities and physical forms that final art can take. It's a really wide breadth of work that has just come out over the last few months. So yeah, I'm as excited as ever about the future of this kind of work.
I think it's a great transition to maybe like the actual favorite maybe acquisitions that we've had this quarter. I think just sticking on the AI train that we're kind of on right now, Peter, but my favorite by far this quarter is Bloom Unveiling by Anna Riddler. We were able to acquire 2 of the tokens from the original Bloom Unveiling contract. This is an artwork and project and series that the Funny Guys and I specifically have been hunting for a long time now. It's really a standout project, not just for the time that it was released, but just the performance and conceptual nature of the project was so far ahead of its time with what Anna was trying to do, and the story behind the piece is huge. And we released a nice little Twitter thread about the acquisition that dives a bit more deeper into the series. But Bloom Unveiling was essentially this on-chain auction art performance that replicated a lot of the tulip mania that occurred during the 1600s, and even some of the more recent tulip manias that occurred during the more contemporary digitized markets. And Anna really kind of does a great job of kind of exploring these relations by creating these AI generated tulips that at the time in 2019 collectors could bid on, and you were bidding on kind of a pixelated preview of this tulip that you were going to buy. And you were competing against these other bots that Anna Riddler had created to kind of compete against you, to create like this kind of market dynamic that existed in real digital or real-time financial markets, where like you have these financial bots that are constantly competing against you for expected value plays or whatever it may be. And then once kind of collectors did win these auctions, this digital GAN generated tulip that they'd have would actually begin to kind of wilt. It would die. This digital object had a timeline on it, a week timeline of when this flower would eventually decay, and this image and artwork that you had would eventually wilt away. And it's really such like an impactful performance, and it is something that we've always loved. And every few months, kind of looked at avenues of, hey, is there some available on the market? How can we get one into collection? And we were finally able to close a deal on it, and it felt huge. And there's a few pieces in the collection that by the time like we finally acquired them, it felt like, wow, this was really like a dream bucket list goal that we kind of checked off, and Bloom Unveiling felt like one of those. So it's always great to get more work by Anna in the collection. She's an incredible artist, and getting something like this is just kind of the cream of the crop for us. So really a standout one for not just this quarter, but I think all the years that we've been collecting so far.
I totally agree that is like a standout acquisition by far. Really happy with that piece. We also got to commission some artworks this quarter. And one of the pieces we commissioned was VCA by Peter Bijls. Peter Bijls is one of the OG algorists. Like he was part of the group with Roman Verostko, Hebert, and he has been creating generative art like since 1974. He started with plotter drawings. Like over the years, like he has explored like a lot of different types of generative arts, also experimented a lot with music. But the piece that we acquired, called VCA, is based on cellular automata, which is the technique that he learned about in 1979. I think the artwork is quite fascinating. Like, it's based on a quite simple technique where like each cell like updates like based on local rules. Then there's also like a color mapping layer on top of that that brings some like random colors into the mix. So although the logic behind the piece is quite simple, I do think the artwork is very captivating. Like, it has very interesting emergent behavior. The artist himself calls it a self-regulating algorithmic cinema. And I do think that's a good description for this piece. Like, you can watch this for a while, and I promise you that you will get surprised. It's always amazing to bring a pioneer into the collection. That was one of the highlights for me this quarter.
And yeah, maybe one thing just to quickly add on that Bales acquisition was it's really cool to see pioneers like Bales working with kind of more contemporary tools. I think a lot of times when we talk to kind of pioneering artists, sometimes it's hard for them to kind of keep up to date with all the new tools and softwares that are being created, and sometimes they like to stay in their previous aesthetics, previous systems, and stick with what they knew instead of kind of exploring something new and maybe unknown to them. But with Peter, it's really cool to see like him, even to this day, still creating something new, still working with new systems, still not just sitting in the same old rut that he was doing work decades ago with. It's still really fascinating to see like what his mind comes up with today. And
yeah, those are really both good choices. I love both of those works. One that is along the same lines that I've chosen for this quarter is Tandem by Harshit Agrawal. It was a commission piece that we reached out to him and had a discussion about work that he felt was relevant to Mint now in 2025, but it's really interesting historical work from that 2016 Alt AI show that I think is really fascinating and really important show in AI art history. You know, it could be something like the Howard Wise show of AI art. So this work by Harshit is from that show that Gene Kogan curated back in 2016. If you look at some of the other artists that were in that show, I mean, it's people like Mario and Alison Parrish and Tom White. Yeah, some of the really important people from the beginnings of AI art. And so it's cool to have a little bit of that history in the Lorandom collection, a prominent piece from that show. Yeah, maybe we can also talk about some of the content over the last quarter that we enjoyed. Yeah, how about you, Conrad?
Editorial-wise, content-wise, the favorite things that came from the Random editorial side this quarter were both the Luba Elliott pieces, with one that we already mentioned with the reprogramming sensory habits, and then also object misrecognition. I think, Luba's almost like a grandmaster in the AI space. At least that's how I see her as, and this like overseeing seer almost. So like whenever she's speaking or putting something together, like you take the time to pay attention to it. Those were awesome to see. And I think overall in this quarter we had, I think Peter, you kind of had a pretty heavy focus on AI and the editorial content pipeline. So it was really cool to see like that focus, and it's always insightful to see Luba's takes on a lot of things, and just her take on the CVPR exhibition that she put together was really nice, and seeing her kind of talk about some of the artists that maybe are a bit more unknown to the people in art space, but deserve a kind of a stage and a spotlight. It's really nice to see. And every time I kind of read something from Luba or hear something or listen to something that Luba says, it always kind of leads me down a rabbit hole, which is nice. And she always leads me to kind of explore more. So shout out to Luba for that.
Yeah, my favorite, let's say, content moments this quarter is actually not a written piece, but it was, well, and this will sound like a shameless self-plug, but it was the conference that we co-hosted at the Digital Art Mile, Generative and AI Art. I think you, Peter, did a great job interviewing Suquen Chung, Sophia Crespo, and Felicon. I thought it was super interesting to hear from both of them like on stage, because they both use AI, but they do it in like such different ways. Like also the way they present their work is like so different. It was like one of those panels, the discussion like actually went like in depth. And like we actually learned like a lot about like these specific artists, like how they look, how they have like a very different view on like similar themes. And I feel like with panels, like that's often lacking. Like it often just like scratches the surface. Like the 25 minutes are over and it's on to the next one. But yeah, this one was, I think, particularly good. And then later in the day, there was also a very interesting discussion with J.J. Charlesworth from Art Review, where he was interviewing Simon Denny and Hito Steyler. I was particularly impressed with Hito. It was like the first time I heard her speak. But I think the way that she looks at like the art world, like she really has this incredible like helicopter view or like bird's eye view of like the entire like art world, like as a system and how all like the different like niches interact. And I thought that was like super fascinating to listen to her. That was definitely a highlight as well.
Yeah, for me, for content, I was really excited to put out the digital art guide for New York earlier, and nice to get some different voices like Conrad, you mentioned Luba, but also Kevin, and we have some more of those coming up later this year. I really like that talk with Gene Kogan and Tom White. I thought that was a really fun talk, sort of at the beginning of this quarter. And then I got to talk to people like Beeple and Marina Abramovich and Dmitry Cherniak that have been, people that I've been looking forward to chat with for quite a while. So it was a nice quarter. We're just in the middle of the year. We have a whole rest of the year to look forward to, and things are definitely happening that we're excited about. So do we want to highlight anything next quarter or the rest of the year that we're excited about?
Just really quickly as we wrap up, one thing I'm looking forward to, I think we mentioned Jan Robert Lekte a lot. I think we mentioned him this call. I think we mentioned him last quarter call previously probably. But something that we really love Lekte's work. We love keeping up with him. And he has a solo show occurring with Office Impart at Paris Photo this year, I believe. And that is what I will be looking forward to see what he comes out with. So he's an artist I always look forward to see what he's creating. And so to know that he has something coming forward with Office Impart, who's also a great partner to, I think, work with, is exciting.
Yeah, I would want to highlight an exhibition that is happening next month in Bellinzona, which is like the southern part of Switzerland, very close to the Italian border. It's actually also this quarter that we commissioned works from Dirk Kooi. We commissioned like 2 unique pieces, Salvage and Buildra. And he is the one next month who will get like it's not a solo exhibition because he's inviting friends who will also show some work, friends such as Siri Vanetti or Andreas Gizin. But he will be the central person of the show. Like the show will mostly be about his work. They're going to show it like at a castle in Bellinzona on a hilltop. So I'm very excited about that. This exhibition is being organized by the MUDA, and the MUDA is a very fascinating organization. Like they have been active in digital art for a while. I don't know exactly what year they start, but it was at least a few years before the NFT hype. And I believe during the COVID pandemic, or just before the COVID pandemic, they raised some funds like through a Kickstarter to open a physical space in Zurich. But then the pandemic happened and it became financially totally impossible to keep the space open. So that meant that just before the NFT boom, they closed the organization. They had already worked with QBB, with Zach Lieberman, with Andreas Gizin. Like they really like showed like incredible taste like all throughout. So it's like super exciting to see that they're revamping the organization. They're starting up again, and next month will be the first exhibition that they do.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I think also in terms of definitely the next quarter, things that we're excited about is the Toledo Museum of Art, Infinite Images. So Loranda will have that. Well, we have that covered. We had the interview with curator Julia Kagansky that came out this week. We're having a video discussion with Eric Calderon, Snowfro, Tyler Hobbs, and Sophia Crespo. And then we also have an artist interview with Death Beef, where we're going to talk about his Glitchbox sculpture, and Sarah Mayohas, also Jared Tarbell. And then one more piece, the fourth, is a review by Kevin Buist. So 4 pieces about the show. It's a show at a museum in the US that is explicitly and specifically about generativity and generative art, looks at it from a perspective that definitely aligns with Lorandom's in the sense that it ties back to the history, but is also related to the present with things like AI and blockchain. And I think it will be quite an important and interesting show, and I'm happy that we have the opportunity to cover it like we do. Yeah, anything else that we want to go over? 2025, big year so far. We're expecting big things for the second half.
No, nothing else. Thanks for sticking around and listening. But yeah, no, I think that will be the quarter review wrapped up.
Thank you for listening, everyone. And thank you guys for the great discussion.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.